just a few kilometers from the Mediterranean Sea in this region called Le Clap in the Languedoc. And I know that there is a really bright future ahead for this region, but there's also quite a long history behind it.
Yes, vines have been grown here for over 2,000 years, initiated by the Romans following the invasion that started in 118 BC. And this particular location where we are now, on this mountain of La Clap, was where a number of legions were garrisoned for strategic reasons, simply because at the time La Clap was an island and it was easy to get the soldiers on and off. Following the invasion, when Julius Caesar came back for the second time, he gave away a lot of the land to his administrative personnel and generals and the legionnaires that had served well, and many of them planted vines and made wine.
Now, I know that we don't really have specifics on what wine varietals they were planting, but what are you planting here today?
Well, this is predominantly a red wine vineyard. Half the vineyard is planted in Syrah, 20% in Grenache, 15% in Marcelin and 5% in Carignan.
How would you describe the taste of some of the grapes that you grow, the Syrah, the Marcelin?
Well, the Syrah has a particular aromatic spice to it, very peppery, very strongly flavoured, and very characteristic of this part of the world, of the Mediterranean climate, which makes it completely different from a Syrah that you might get from Australia or from California, for example. And Marcelin is relatively new. Marcelin was also developed specifically for this part of the northern Mediterranean, and it's a hybrid between Cabernet Sauvignon and Grenache. We were recommended to plant it on the land that we'd cleared from the garrigue by the French Department of Agriculture, and the results have been really quite outstanding.
And when you talk about that garrigue, it's the brush and the, I guess, part of the terroir that's here that really gives it that herbaceousness?
Yes, the word terroir is a catch-all for everything that is unexplainable, and as an engineer I was rather skeptical that it really had any meaning. But having been here now for 10 years and seen what happens here in this vineyard, I do believe that there are characteristics that determine the taste and the flavours of wine from a particular area. Here in Chateau Camp-les-Enz, it's the proximity to the sea. It's also the fact we're surrounded by this vegetation, which brings a lot of herbaceousness and savours to the wine through the rosemary and thyme and juniper. And it's also the soil, being on a limestone mountain and having the ancient soils here in the basins that are a mixture of clay and silt, give a lot of minerality also to the wine. And we put those elements together with the effect of the sea mists which occur during several periods of the summer period, and we get flavours that are really quite outstanding.
You weren't a believer in terroir, and now you obviously are. What else do you believe about this region?
Well, I believe it has a tremendous future. We came to Languedoc because we believed in the potential of the region. It is totally undercommunicated in terms of its potential, and there's a lot of effort now going in by the French government and by local organisations to promote what is perhaps one of the best potential wine growing regions of the world. Languedoc is still perhaps the biggest wine growing region, but the least well understood. But the potential of the wine is quite incredible, and the fact that vineyards now are able to consistently win trophies and gold medals in international competitions against some of the best well-known regions in the world, I think proves that.
That sounds great. I think we should go give that Syrah and Marcelin blend a try.
I think we should indeed, yes.
Catherine, you bought Chateau de Combabel about 5 years ago here in Saint-Chinian,
Yes.
in the Languedoc region.
Yeah.
Why did you decide to buy here?
Languedoc is a very innovative area for winemaking, and it also has plenty of sun. It also has the different terroirs or soils that make for interesting wines. Also, it's guaranteed sun throughout the year, mainly. Although today is probably
Right, I was going to say, except for today.
and I think there are a lot of exciting young winemakers coming to the Languedoc. That to me means that there is something very interesting and vibrant, and there's a life here. And to be part of this sort of move forward to better quality wine from an area that is renowned for producing bulk wine, we want to change that, specifically in Saint-Chinian, to one of the top appellations in France.
Now, what about the organic side of things? Because this vineyard is organic and biodynamic, and was, in fact, when you bought it,
Yes.
right?
I mean, when we started looking, we wanted an organic farm or vineyard, and we just happened to stumble across a biodynamic vineyard. I didn't want to use chemicals or pesticides. Having studied wine for many years, I also knew that you didn't need to use any chemicals or pesticides to produce good wine. It wasn't until really the Second World War that people started using chemicals in agriculture.
To fight bacteria in the vineyard?
Fight bacteria, to guarantee a crop.
In the past, people have perceived organic wine to be not of a high quality. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, 20 years ago, I would agree with you. Today, I think that's a different question. I think it's the exception rather than the rule. And I think today, organic wines that are available on the market are so much better. They are better made. People are adhering to using a sufficient amount of sulfur to preserve the wine. It is a preservative. They're making better quality wine because they're looking after the vineyard better. And I think all their practices, it's just the whole thing is so much better than it was 20 years ago. There is no excuse today to have a bad organic wine.
Okay, then why is this region so perfect for organic winemaking and biodynamics?
Well, the rainfall is very low, and if you don't have a lot of humidity, it's easier to keep the vineyard healthy. You don't have a lot of mildew or odium in the spring and the summer. But if you treat the soil as we do, and that's part of being biodynamic, is you look at the soil, you look at what's underneath and what's feeding the vine. If you have a healthy soil, that healthy soil will actually retain the water to nourish your vineyard. And you can only do that by feeding it natural organic nutrients, because it's a living organism.
What do you use instead of the chemicals?
Well, we do use chemicals, but they're organic chemicals. And the main product that we use is sulfur. Sulfur is an all-round preventative product, and we also use a tiny bit of copper in combination with sulfur, but we also use tisanes. We can use preparations of nettle and chamomile, which we spray, and that will help prevent some pests and some diseases. But more importantly, our pest control is our garri, and we've encouraged more plants. We have bees on the property, and they help pollinate the plants, so every year we're getting more and more plants and flowers. Those flowers will attract insects. Each flower has a different insect that it attracts, and then you have that eco-cycle.
Exactly, an ecosystem. Yeah.
That's our pest control.
Yeah. And what about sulfur? Because that's something that even on a label you would see that it contains sulfites.
Every wine is going to contain sulfites. We have to use sulfur in the vineyard to protect the vineyard. We have to use sulfur in the winery to protect the wine. If we didn't do that, then we would have bad organic wine. There's no question.
If it's organic, that means I can have one extra glass.
You can have 2 or 3 if you like.
It's not my kind of wine. That is my kind of wine. Played an integral role in the growth and establishment of La Livinière here in Minervois. So what was it about this region that made him establish his business here?
He saw the potential of the vineyards in the area and wanted to promote the area. He could have chosen any other area because he was dealing with Burgundy people and Bordeaux people or Loire people, but he really believed in this area. It's a very rural area with tough guys that work hands in the soil, if we can put it that way.
They're not afraid to get their hands dirty.
Absolutely.
How did your father end up taking over Chateau de Gorgazeau?
As part of his job, he was dealing with all this wine region, buying wines from all over Provence, Bordeaux, Burgundy, Loire, and specifically dealing with 17 different sources in the Minervois. One of these people, local people, told him there was a property on the market at the time. That was in '73. When he came, he saw the property and decided to buy it.
What would you say your father has done for La Livinière?
At the time, the Languedoc was a little bit like in a crisis because people were producing mainly huge quantity of wine but not caring about the quality. The main challenge was, of course, to improve the new production of wine, and his second great challenge was to create Cru La Livinière.
When you say the Cru La Livinière, what does that really mean?
Cru is the word for vat or vintage. It's a distinction. It's a top distinction. He felt, with a couple of colleagues or friends or shareholders, that there was a small restricted area called La Livinière, which is our village. And then he, for 15 years, with lots of reunions and conferences with the government, tried to uplift that village La Livinière to create the Cru La Livinière.
What do you think your father would say if he had an opportunity to tell the world about this region?
He would like to tell everybody that it's a great region that make beautiful wines for good value. It could be the next Bordeaux, but let's say that we have first the Languedoc and we have our own identity. I would just say, try our wine and you'll never be disappointed.
You're one of many families who have had experience in multiple regions in France but have decided to kind of plant yourselves here in the Languedoc region. So why did you decide to come here?
Well, we looked at different places in France to expand our vineyards, and one of the one of the the biggest vineyard of France is the Languedoc, so it has a variety of climate, of soils, and also grape that you can grow. And after looking at all the different appellations, my father and I, in 2002, arrived at La Livinière, which had been recognized as a Grand Cru in '97. And it was just the beginning of the recognition of this appellation. The land was affordable compared to Bordeaux. The wines that we tasted at the times were very impressive, so that's why we decided to set foot in La Livinière and to invest in this region and produce some wines here since 2002.
Now, it's not really as easy as people think. When you take over a property, there's a lot of work to do before you can even start growing these vines, right?
Yes, well, we had a very precise idea of the wine that we wanted to produce here, which is relies a lot on the Syrah, the varietal that we believe is the best suited for this place. And we structured completely the estate. From 40 hectares, we downsized to 20. We uprooted a lot of Carignan, Cinsault, which were varietals that are very productive, but in terms of quality, they're not the best ones. You know, the Carignan, for instance, can produce a good quality wine, but it has to be very old Carignan. It has to be over 40 years old. So we kept the little Carignan that was very old, and we replanted most of the vineyard with Syrah. And today the vineyard is about 60 hectares with 70% Syrah planted.
Now, a lot of talk about Syrah. What is it about this region that is so Syrah friendly?
Well, the climate is a little bit similar to the Rhone. It's pretty hot. There is some wind also. Syrah has a relatively short cycle, which is perfectly suited for the climate. And we tasted many wines, and it appeared that Syrah, for some reason, shows the best finesse, elegance, and is really the best suited for this land.
And how would you say that Syrah would differ from, let's say, Syrah grown in the Rhone Valley and Syrah that is planted around the world?
Oh, well, every region has its own style, and it's very difficult to characterize precisely. In the rest of the world, in places like Australia, where Syrah is referred to as Shiraz, the wines are bolder, bigger, probably higher alcohol. In the Rhone, they express different aromatics. Here, they have, we believe, enough freshness, good acidity, good structure, and very nice flavors, and they're just different.
Mm-hmm. And there's also something in this region called the garrigue.
The garrigue,
which
exactly.
and explain what that is.
Well, the garrigue is a mix of different herbs and aromats that grow widely here, and that will give a taste to the wines here, because we believe that the grapes absorbs a little bit like a sponge all the flavors surrounding. If you have eucalyptus next to a vineyard, then you can, some Australian wines, for instance, you can taste the eucalyptus, a very minty taste. Same here with garrigue, and it makes the wine very spicy and very interesting, very typical of this region.
And I would think it would also make it a good food pairing wine, because it's a lot of herbs and lavender and thyme and those kind of flavors.
That's very interesting also, because you can match to the local dishes, to the game, to wild boars and ragout styles and all the specialties that you have in the region, yes.
Do you have a favorite food pairing?
I like roasted meats, so I like my wines with roasted meats and nicely spiced. It's just simply the best,
Now, you have been here for a few years now. You're just really getting your roots here, and is it working for you?
Yes, it's working. It's still a learning process, because in terms of life of vineyard, we've been here for 8 years, and although some of the vines are old vines, a lot of plantations were done when we arrived. So it's, we are still learning every day, but we think that after 8 years we're getting closer to the initial idea that we had when we set foot here and producing the wines that we really wanted to produce.
How do you see this region evolving? What do you want to happen in the future?
Well, I think that there are more producers now that are focusing on quality. For historical reasons, the Languedoc had been used, so to speak, to produce mass market wines, but that does not mean that the potential for quality is not there. I think the terroir is really exceptional. The specificity of the wine is really important, and with the change in the consumption, with people drinking less but better quality wines, there is a real interest in finding the rising stars of the Languedoc, and more producers now are doing great wines, and the image is changing. And I think in the future that's really one of the wine regions you want to look at in terms of rising stars.
Yeah, that sounds great. I look forward to seeing you guys at the top of the charts.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we will.